welcome to WTCI's Global Business Webinar Series. My name is Lydia Yodi, and I'm the Senior Manager of Business Development and Membership at the World Trade Center Institute. For those of you who aren't familiar with this series, we launched this a couple of months ago now, back in April, as a way to keep our network and our members connected and to highlight some speakers and topics that are top of mind and relevant in the current global business landscape. We've covered topics including Maryland's path to recovery with Secretary Kelly Schultz of the Maryland Department of Commerce. We've covered other topics like the future of globalization, global food security, big changes driven by the pandemic, and just last week we heard from Anirban Basu about the U.S. and global economic outlook. Today's topic is the disruption dilemma, how to pivot from crisis to success. And our speakers today are going to provide some insight on how to redefine business as usual, especially now that we're using more technology, and how we can use that technology across all business operations going forward. So today we are hosting a webinar for 1 hour as opposed to 30 minutes, which means that we'll hear from our speakers for about 30 to 40 minutes today in a discussion style, and then we'll follow that with a question and answer. And for participants that are on the call now, you can submit your questions throughout the course of the webinar using the Q&A icon on the bottom of your Zoom call screen. We ask that when you submit your questions, it'd be great if you could include your company name so that we can also read that out loud with your question. So as I mentioned, today we have 3 guest speakers, and our lead speaker today is Tim Culp. Tim Culp is the Vice President of Innovation and Strategy at Mind Over Machines. Mind Over Machines is a data software consultancy, and they're also a WTCI member company. They have been for a few years. Tim, a little background on Tim. He received his bachelor's in religious studies, art, and art history from McDaniel College, and his master's in applied information technology from Towson University. Before Mind Over Machines, Tim held positions in IT at advertising.com, Carroll County Public School System, and United Health Group. Today, we're also going to hear from Jacob Su he's the CEO of Catalyte, and Catalyte is a young minority-led Baltimore-based firm with expertise in workforce data science. Jacob studied finance at the Wharton School of Business and received his bachelor's in economics from the University of Pennsylvania. Prior to Catalyte, Jacob was the CEO at a company called Symbio, and Symbio was a global IT service company, and Jacob helped to transform Symbio from an early stage startup to a global company, sort of what he's doing with Catalyte these days. And that company ended up having over 23,000 employees worldwide. Jacob is also a young global leader of the World Economic Forum, and he's been named one of the world's top 12 CEOs by Chief Executive Magazine. And one more thing I want to note about Jacob is he's also a board member of Welcoming America, and Welcoming America helps cities in the U.S. become more welcoming of immigrants. So Jacob, it's a really impressive background you have there, and we're happy to have you today. Finally, we'll also hear from Nate Mccoy. Nate is the VP of Software Development and Engineering for Verizon Media. And Verizon Media is an innovative content advertising and tech firm that manages brands like Yahoo, HuffPost, and TechCrunch. Nate has worked in the tech industry for over 20 years now, and he's based in Baltimore, and he manages a global team across 7 time zones. So his team develops publisher advertising products that account for billions of dollars in revenue for Verizon Media. So Nate, thanks for being here with us today. And I'm going to first kick it off. I think Tim's going to start it off. But today, Tim, what can you tell us about the current innovations and use of technology and trends in tech, and how they already have an impact on businesses, but also how they'll continue to shape the workplace as we move forward past this pandemic?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having us today, Lydia. And Jake and Nate, thank you for joining. I'm really excited for our conversation today. So to answer the question, Lydia, basically technology is about keeping up with the speed of business. So business is moving faster, technology is moving faster. All of these capabilities that we hear the buzzwords of today turn into the standard operating procedures of tomorrow. And so whether you're talking about technologies like artificial intelligence or robotic process automation, these things, flash up and people are like, oh, this is a thing. And then all of a sudden they're super critical and important. But one of the things when we talk about disruption it's not just about, we are very deep into COVID-19 right now, and we have all this change happening around COVID-19. But disruption happens all the time. I mean, we have where you're getting into a merger or an acquisition scenario, and the disruption is this new group showing up and you're not sure what to do with it. And so, when we think about disruption, I guess I'm going to throw it out to, Jake and Nate, and I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts on, how can you set up an organization? You can set up your technology to be able to pivot, but organizationally, if you can't pivot, your technology doesn't really matter. So what are some of your guys' thoughts on setting up your organization to pivot quickly? And, I guess Jake, will throw it to you first, since you're the next in line on my Zoom video stack.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. So I've been running technology companies for all my life, and one thing that probably a lot of people who are outside of technology probably don't think a lot about is Moore's law, right? And frankly, over the last 50, 60 years, that's really been like the fundamental law of technology, and that basically is saying, basically every 18 months it was coined by Gordon Moore, who actually invented was founder of Intel. But, every 18 months, the number of transistors you can put on a chip doubles, which actually the corollary of that is that it got, your cost of processing gets cut in half. What that's ultimately done, though, is that every technology company has gotten used to this obsolescence cycle of every 18 months. There's something new that comes on the market that fundamentally you have to create a step change in your performance, a step change in the value that you provide. So you get very used to this idea of creative destruction. I think Bill Gates said it very, very well that, at the height of Microsoft's power, he said, look, Microsoft is only 18 to 24 months away from obsolescence, right? There's always going to be competitors coming onto the market. So ultimately what that means, I think, for us coming out of technology is that crises and pivots and change is part of the business model, right? It's standard operating procedure. So as you start to build a business, I think it's really important that first you build that optionality into your business, right? You build that, you build with the expectation that there's going to be change, there's going to be crises. Every 18, 24 months, there's some new technology, some new architecture that's going to turn your world upside down, and you got to stay ahead of it, right? So I think of it as, the analogy I always think of is, you've got to be like a surfer, right? Surfing the waves of change versus sort of being a bystander and having it crash down on you. And so a big part of that is constantly being in this reinvention, rethinking process. For even Catalyte, in the best of times, we're always fundamentally rethinking our business model, fundamentally examining what are the key drivers of, and how can we do it better, right? How do we actually disrupt ourselves before it happens to us? So for us, COVID and pandemics, absolutely, look, it's absolutely a crisis. I don't mean to sort of discount that. But again, I think that if you build that into your business model, if you build that into sort of the way you think about strategy, and frankly, you build optionality into your business, when that change inevitably comes, you can hopefully capitalize on the opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Nate, you, at Verizon, what are you seeing in this kind of organizing to pivot quickly? It's a big company, hard to pivot quickly.
Well, I think ultimately it comes down to, first off, being able to examine what's going on and have the courage to identify it and call it what it is and talk about it. It comes down to communication and being transparent. Verizon, the thing that happened like from the very beginning is our CEO in the COVID crisis, he started doing streaming meetings every day and giving us the lowdown on what is our plans, what are we doing with people, going directly at the problems and talking about them, bringing in experts, communicating, like acting as in a way that was, I think, very responsible and helpful and inspired trust. Sort of like gave the trust to us, we trusted him back. And actually all of our leaders really demonstrated that in a way that I haven't always seen in the public domain. It was actually pretty inspiring. I'm not typically, I've worked in industry for a long time, but I'm not usually a corporate rah-rah kind of person. But I would say, this experience so far has really given me that sense. So courage, communication, and trust, I think for me are the top three things to handle disruption.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, and as you were talking through that, the communication aspect is so critical. No matter what size business you are, having that, communication around what's the change and how are we going to get there. And we're going to talk more about that later. But this kind of gets into the plan. And we were all prepping for this call, and we were talking about like the need for a written plan. And I think the three of us kind of jointly laughed, chortled even maybe, laughed that off of, sure, yeah, written plan. That's a great idea. As I think about, one of my favorite quotes is, plans are useless, but planning is indispensable. And, it's that process of going through the planning. And so, what are some of your guys' experiences with people who have either built a plan and said, okay, hey, we're going to execute this plan and this is how we're going to navigate this time, and things went great or blew up, or no plan, we're just good, here's what we go. What are your thoughts? Whoever wants to take it first.
I could take it. So for us, we certainly very quickly, during COVID sort of had executed on an operating plan, right? So a big part of it was really doing a number of scenario plans in terms of sort of how we think the business may sort of evolve. And then sort of thinking about it in terms of options, right? So what are the kind of options ahead of us, right? It's a series of if-then kind of questions, like statements that we end up making. And so that gave us at least a sense of where things would go if the next thing happened, right? If the next shoe drops, this is what we're going to do, kind of thing. But I mentioned earlier also around sort of this need to sort of continually pivot. I can in almost at any given time at Catalyte, we probably have a dozen or so ideas that we want to try. And the way we think about innovation and trying new things is not in terms of creating plans and sort of doing heavy-handed rollouts. We think of them as very cheap, fast experiments we can run, right? And how do we very quickly kind of launch experiments? So one of the things that I think clearly during a crisis, you've got to first shore up your core business, stem the losses, make sure you've got that, and that's where I think great plans come into play. But I think also, what companies should also do is also try to be ambitious too, right? I think crises are actually the best times to try crazy ideas. We launched Retrain America in the heart of the crisis. We actually launched a new development center also during the crisis. And a big part of it also was just to, again, a part of it is this is the best time to kind of create a quick experiment and sort of test some new theories out and hopefully learn from them. Again, I think a bunch of it is sort of having those contingency plans ahead of time, having those ideas that you're willing to execute, and then start doing them even during crises. I think that's part of the muscle that has to be developed in an organization that's trying to sort of be able to surf these changes.
Yeah, so I agree. Sometimes plans are great and sometimes not. My current phase of my career, which is a long phase, began exactly 20 years and 4 months ago. I was at a company that was a startup, and we had grown rapidly, and we basically had a public offering in February of 2000. And 2 months later, and all of our customers were .com customers, and 2 months later, the .com crash occurred. We were lucky, fortunate, we had put money in the bank, but we had a plan. We were going to be the best digital advertising agency on the planet and make a ton of money. We had a lot of internal tools and really good people, lots of marketing, lots of technology, and we were funded by one of the founders of Amazon. It was amazing. And we went out at $24. We put $120 million in the bank. We peaked at like $60, $70. And then by August, our stock price was down to 10. And that was a long way from how far it actually went down. So in October of that year, we sat down and we said, look, what is our core strength? And we, as a leadership group, we talked about what do we've got? We've got this agency and we've got these tools. And we decided to pivot. And as a group, we talked about, are we going to do this or not? If we're going to do it, are we going to do it together and go all in? Or is this, something that we're just going to let go? And what we decided to do is we decided to take our tooling and build it up and sell it to competitors of our agency business. So we became sort of like a two-headed, monster, created a separate division. One division supported the other division. Well, we both actually, ate the money for a while that we had in the bank. But eventually we created a product. And then another crisis occurred in 9/11, just when our product was ready for sale. So we had no customers for another year, and we became basically a penny stock, like 70 cents. Fast forward 7 years later, we were bought by Microsoft for $6 billion. So at the time, when we were going through the crisis, there wasn't a plan. Like, we had no plan to expect that the dot-com bubble would burst. We had no plan for 9/11 and not getting any customers for another year. And so in a sense, what you have to do is you have to build a great team. And I go back to my earlier statement. You're going to have a great team if you communicate and you trust and you demonstrate vulnerability, I guess, is primarily how you build trust, and you're honest and you work together and you go all in. You don't have some people that are sitting on the sidelines. And because you have trust and communication, you can call things for what they are. You can identify things and not step over them. So it's a good story, but it is all about pivoting and disruption.
Yeah, no, that's a great story. And I think talking about disruption and what you're hitting here is really cultural, right? And saying it's a cultural aspect of being able to pivot, to have good communication, to make communication a priority. With Mind Over Machines, we talk a lot about change as one of our cultural things because, in the technology space, things constantly change, as Nate's story really highlighted there. And when we're looking at change, we talk about change isn't the problem for most people. It's the transition. It's getting to that change state. Having those, we call them the 4 Ps, the part, the, product, the plan, and all that stuff, getting and saying, okay, here's where we're going. Here's how we're all going to get there. From your guys' perspective, what's the hardest part of change?
Go ahead, Jake.
Yeah. Of course, the hardest part always is going to be people, right? That's always going to be the toughest one. And I think a part of it is going to be around, greatly, I think to your point of your question earlier about Tim around culture, is to build a culture where you can bring people along, where people also understand that, the leaders don't necessarily know what the end state's going to be, right? You got to bring them along as part of this process and part of that transition. And frankly, I think when leaders are authentic about saying, for example, I don't know. I don't know what the post-COVID world's going to look like, right? I don't know what the future go-to-market plan is going to be, but we're going to work at it, right? We're going to experiment. We're going to work at it. We're going to test that thesis. We're going to keep testing at it until we figure it out. At that point, I find that most people want to do their part. Most people want to contribute to be part of that. And that's frankly what we found during COVID. The first 2 weeks of this crisis when the sky was falling, what we actually ended up learning was some of our toughest decisions, we were very open about them. We communicated why we were thinking about them. Ultimately we got almost universal positive feedback because people wanted to be part of that change, right? People recognize that there's a problem and they wanted to be part of it. So again, I think the people part is always the toughest one, and communication and culture is the key.
Yeah, I agree. And I wonder how many people on the webinar just gasped when you're like, well, leaders don't always know. And I think there's probably a lot of people are like, what? And some people are like, uh-huh. Nate, what are your thoughts?
I also agree with everything you guys have said. And also being willing to learn, I think is important. I have gotten advice from people that I work with about how to approach this crisis in terms of just, asking people how they're doing, right? When we get on these video calls, are you okay? Do you need anything? Giving people the space to deal with family situations or whatever situation, right? Take the time off. Somebody told me that as a leader in my organization that I should probably take time off to demonstrate that it's okay, because people aren't going on vacations per se, although that is starting to happen, I guess, sort of staycations maybe, or if you can find an isolated place to go to. So yeah, I think it's part of the change process is just being open to learn and then demonstrating what you learn and talking about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that we're kind of talking about here is, change and how do we get through that change? And I think it begs the question of how do we define success? So we're thinking about, hey, we're in this pivot, we're trying change, we're doing these experiments. How do we define success? And I know from a just pure project management perspective, everybody having a shared vision of what does done mean? Like, what does that word done mean? How do we know we are done? Same thing with this, success. How do we know it's successful? Or is this one of those cultural ambiguous things? I mean, what do you guys think? Nate, we'll start with you because you're the biggest picture on my screen.
So, I mean, I think a lot of it is common sense. Some things, some projects that you do are binary. Being done just literally means you've delivered it and you're done. I think with the COVID, it's obviously dynamic, right? We are experiencing new information every week, every day. And so I think you have to maybe define success differently. You talk about, for example, maybe retention is success right now, right? Or just being able not to lay people off or furlough them is also success, especially right now. And maybe it's just a lesson forever, but it is, the success is really defined in terms of people, right? We're getting through this, right? So, but more generally, I do think it's important, if you can, to identify on any project, what is that done criteria, what is that end game, and then communicating that, relentlessly, so that everyone's got the same, vision and is aiming for the same thing. As we learn with COVID what we can do, like back to work plans, for example, and which they're starting to do, for example, in Taiwan, where one of the teams I work with is there. So they're just communicating really clearly and effectively, what it is to, how the process is going to work, how you're going to get back in there. But staying on message and being adaptive is part of it.
Jake, your thoughts?
Yeah. No, I agree with everything Nate said, and I just sort of maybe add, and I think maybe, given the sort of context that we're in with sort of the pandemic and frankly George Floyd, I think it's important that we start thinking in a more balanced way about those metrics and outcomes. So for example, when we launch experiments, we don't sort of just optimize on very sort of straightforward economic or business metrics. We also try to optimize on people metrics. And quite frankly, even if you think about Catalyte, our core business, one of the things that people don't understand, oftentimes people sort of kind of don't get about sort of what we're trying to do is that we actually are optimizing our business for something that's not economic, which is really around socioeconomic mobility. So how do we take people in who may be coming in from sort of poverty or near poverty, and how do we very predictably, consistently move them into essentially a higher socioeconomic strata? The reason why we do that, obviously beyond sort of the social benefits and the importance of that, is also, again, it's creating a balanced outcome, right? If you want to have long-term, you want to have engaged people, you got to give everybody sort of a path where they're going to grow and rise on a pretty predictable way. So, so look, we could I think at any given time, one of the mistakes I think a lot of organizations do is they over-optimize on a particular business or economic metric or outcome without really thinking about sort of a balanced outcome. And look, I think even before COVID, people were talking about this business roundtable and sort of, creating balanced outcomes. Well, I think now organizations need to be very explicit about that. Right? How do you explicitly make those kind of outcomes a core part of what you're driving to beyond simply business metrics?
I'm a bit of a fanboy of Catalyte. We're working with them, and I can't think of any better idea of success than taking someone from a hourly wage job and training them to, really, raise their life up and do something amazing, change their lives. And it's, success is definitely defined as opportunity for all, right? I don't mean to turn this into necessarily Catalyte marketing, but love what you guys do. I'm really, really impressed.
Thank you, Nate. Yeah. I really appreciate it. It means a lot coming from you. Appreciate that.
Excellent. So the new normal, again, another thing we were talking about as we got together that also caused laughter of this new normal. And, everywhere you look, the new normal is in your face and everybody talking about the new normal. And as we think about technology careers, that we've all had, and we all kind of are looking around, and yes, absolutely, it's a serious crisis happening right now, on many fronts. And we say, okay, well, but this pivoting, this changing, this is what we're used to in the technology industry. We've seen that we've got to get ready. Oh, the internet shows up. We got to get ready for it. Oh, iPhone shows up. Oh, wow. Okay. We got to think about that. Oh, what's this IoT thing happening over here? Like, it's just something that takes attention. Nate was showing his 5G shirt earlier. We think about like these new technologies and like, okay, what's this mean? Is the new normal like a real thing, guys, or what are your thoughts here? Jake, you're biggest on my screen, so take it away.
Sure. Look, my head of marketing actually came up with a good term. She calls it the next normal, right? Is that, and you have to assume that it's just a continuous, relentless process, right? So, I think you're constantly, a lot of it is, what you're really talking about is ultimately volatility, right? And I think reality is that, we have to all get used to volatility on an ongoing basis because we swing from one extreme to another. So oftentimes I think a big part of it, and even when you're thinking about, like, when we think about our scenarios, like when we do strategy, we think about these different scenarios, it's really instructive to go to those extremes, right? Take a barbell view of it, right? Things that may be extremely good or extremely bad, and sort of at least, kind of like the joke, Elizabeth Warren sort of, campaign, we have a plan for that, right? We've got an idea for how to address that. But again, you have to assume that this change is continuous. It's just part of the operating, that's part of the operating plan, right? Is that change and disruption is going to be continuous and is going to continue to happen to you.
Yeah, so I do laugh at the new normal. It's a cliche, but at the same time, I'm sure like many of the people on this call, ignoring COVID and some of the craziness in the world, what a great time to be alive. I'm sure everyone or many have had the thought that we're so lucky that we have video conferencing and the ability to buy stuff from Amazon, right? And for many of us, not all I know, but many of us have jobs even, right? But the technology is so amazing. Like that's the lives that we've lived, just been surrounded with constant technology change. And I look back over, from the very first computer that I bought in the early 80s till now, and I've just thought there's been so many disruptions. It is hard to imagine anything more disruptive than this pandemic in that entire time. I'm watching our company talk about like, do we need offices, right? Or if we have offices, are they going to be shared by a small number of people on a rotating basis, right? And how's that going to work? I mean, we can save a lot of money. I don't know. And we're all managing to do these conference calls. It seems probably common sense. For me, we can do them, but I definitely miss the face-to-face contact and that ability to walk down the hall and just, talk to somebody. And there's no way to truly replace that with a video call. So there will be, pros and cons to whatever comes out of this, but I do not think that the world is going to return to what it was. It's definitely going to be different. So new normal, I suppose.
Yeah. And the next normal, the new normal, this puts me in mind of a lot of, the clients that we're working with that are implementing these new technologies and processes. Earlier I mentioned RPA, and it's not commercial for RPA, but PA that is very disruptive to people because you're coming in and you're saying, okay, by the way, here's your new sidekick. It is a piece of technology that you can't talk to, and you can't really, your interaction with it is you push this button. And a lot of times navigating that new normal is very challenging for people. And so having that, not just here's what we need to be focused on, that transition I talked about earlier of here's where you belong in that, and that communication that Nate was talking about and the culture that Jake was talking about, these all kind of come together. And one of the things that we've seen is helping people become and champion being change agents, that it's not just about like this change is happening to you, but you can empower and run with it. And so, when we talk about kind of creating a culture of change agents, what have you guys seen with that? And I mean, Jake, obviously this is what you guys do, right? I mean, you create change and really deliver on it. So talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, I think inherent in our kind of core business is that, we're taking people from all walks of life and making them high performing, highly successful engineers. And the way that we do that is that we really are looking at fundamental behaviors, right? So the way the science works is that we have mapped out discrete behaviors that actually drive the success of exemplary performers, so the highest performing engineers, and we look at data to kind of determine that. And then we basically go backwards and we try to look for people who have attributes that would predict for those same behaviors. Is that we've shown that as long as people have those inherent attributes, we can turn them very rapidly into the highest performing and highly successful engineers. A key part of it is this idea of continuous growth mindset, right? Is this idea that you have, to be successful as an engineer, it's not about what tech stack you're strong in. I mean, great engineers have to pick up new tech stacks as needed, right? Again, like every 2 to 4 years, there's some new technology that turns whatever you're doing upside down. So you have to be in that mode of continuously sort of acquiring new skills. So I always like to use the analogy, great engineers are like great musicians. Right? You only become a great musician, not by what school you went to, but by how well you play. Like, how much do you play? Like, who do you play with? What kind of music do you play? And you always find that the top musicians, like the top people, the top of their game, are people who are constantly sort of putting themselves into new situations, right? Learning different types of genres, different kinds of music, mixing things up. And we encourage that, right? That's part of that's part of the things that we're actually looking for in our people. So, a big part of Catalyte's corporate culture is bubbled up from the bottom up, where when you find people who all exhibit that same continuous growth mindset, that sort of translates into an organization that is constantly sort of doing that at a higher level.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think that learning process is key to change as well. And there's a tension in the corporate world where we have these projects that have to deliver on, huge revenue opportunities, and you want to try to make it as efficient for everyone to work, with standards, and so that will drive you towards trying to keep things the same. But if you do that, eventually people will lose their skills, they'll become automatons, they won't be interested or motivated. So I think it's incredibly important to provide opportunities for people to learn new things in the environment that you're in, and have sort of that creativity to think about, okay, within that world where we're trying to be efficient, where can we try something new, and how can we foster that? And part of that is also related to change, is establishing like just the top message, the most important thing that people need to know, the vision, right? And staying on that message, being clear, succinct, and repetitive, and if people then understand what the message is, and you give them the ability to learn and try new things, and you don't micromanage what they do, give them some autonomy, then they will do it. They'll figure it out. If having like efficient software development is important and you're on message about that, but you give people the ability to go figure out how to do it, they'll do it, right? So I think all those things are sort of like interrelated. You got to have a vision, you got to learn and create opportunities for learning, and you can't micromanage people. You got to let them make their own decisions. Yeah. One of the great things about being in this industry is that you can find a job where you won't be told what to do every day. And if you happen to be working in a job where that's true, then leave it and go find one where you can have some autonomy, because you can get it.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we think about how do we keep people from going back to those old behaviors? People get excited, there's a new change and, all this stuff. And COVID's a great example. We're all now doing this remote work and doing this, and the office opens and everybody runs back and communication falls all apart. Yeah. So, how are you guys seeing to prevent that and kind of address that proactively? With Mind Over Machines, where we refer to it as adoption coaching, where we say, okay, here's the plan, here's the change that we're going through, and here are the things that we want to make sure that we don't slip as we continue the behaviors. What about you guys with how you're implementing your change agents?
I'd say that, one of the things that, even for myself, is took a little bit of adjustment for me when I came to Catalyte, is there is a lot of feedback that we get from really from everybody in the organization, right? So even if you think about our going back to work, going back to the office, we're keying off of surveys, right? We're keying off of what our people are telling us. Because a big part of it is, I think it's very hard, right, for leaders to be too prescriptive about change. Simply because, again, if you recognize that, uncertainty is just part of the operating plan, oftentimes being too prescriptive is actually what makes it brittle, right? It's actually what creates fragility in your organization. Is you decide you want to do one thing, and the reality is that your system wants to do something else. So a big part of it is really, again, is getting sort of the feedback from all quarters of the organization around what the next move might be. And recognizing, again, when you bring people into that process and you bring them along with that process, I think you'll come to better decisions. Reality is, like, the world is very complex. It's only gotten more complex. I think COVID and George Floyd has only laid bare how fragile and brittle our system ultimately is. And so I think, again, great leaders are going to need to take a much more systems view on, how do you get to those kind of decision points in the future.
I think keeping things simple. The message has to be really simple, especially if it's going to go out to a lot of people, and you got to stay on message, right? So the things that are most important, have a very few of them, just, one, if you can, one or two, and keep, talking about it. And then sort of demonstrate, feedback also. Like, I love the surveys, we do that also. But also not stepping over something when you see it directly. Just talk about it and demonstrate that, and people will start to also see that it's okay to talk about things. It doesn't mean that it's the end of the world. And if you're in a feedback situation, you're talking about something that you want to make sure is not going the wrong direction, right? Talk about how it impacts you, not somebody else, or just call out the behavior as if it stands alone without any context, but say, like, hey, this is impacting me in this way. And some of that sort of just basic communication things, you can demonstrate it, you can teach it to people, you can talk about it, but yeah, just don't have too many priorities and stay on message.
Right. Excellent. So at this point, I think we're at time for Q&A. Lydia, is you with us?
Yeah, hi. Yeah, we do have a few questions, and even during this Q&A process, the participants, I want to remind them that they can continue to submit questions. So the first one is actually for Nate, and it's from Anonymous. But the question is, Nate, can you elaborate? Earlier, you were talking about Taiwan and other international offices. Can you elaborate on that example and what it is that they're finding? I think you covered you kind of skimmed the surface on that, but what are more big picture details?
Well, specifically about Taiwan, it was about a back to work plan. And so their country managed to lock down early and then have good quarantining. And I actually am not knowledgeable about all of the actual steps that the country took, but they have definitely, had fewer cases and gotten it underhand more quickly. So it's about then the actual process and policies that they're putting in place for people to go back into the office. So that involves, like, what percentage of people can be in the office. Maybe there's rotating days, how they're going to deal with conference rooms, how they're going to deal with social distancing within the office, wearing of masks, when you wear a mask, when you don't. If you're having a meeting, do you do it in a conference room together, or do you take it from your desk still, even though you're in the office? And so there's a lot of that actual really detailed planning and communication about the plan to the people in Taiwan. So they're definitely ahead of the rest of the world. I don't think we have another. I think maybe the next nearest one for my organization is going to be the people in Israel. But the rest of us are still waiting.
Yeah, do you have any idea of when you think you all will go back, like here?
Last we heard, it was September for us, and I honestly don't believe anything. I don't know. Don't know.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. And we have another question here for Jacob. This is actually from the World Trade Center Institute's co-CEO, Susan Applin. And she asked, you talked about expanding Catalyte based on socioeconomic inclusion. which, I know I've done a lot of research on your company. I think it's fantastic what you do there. And mostly we're talking about improving those lives. Can you talk about how that strategy, the strategy to reduce unintended biases of coders and tech builders, can also improve technology products?
Mm-hmm. Well, Catalyte really was founded over 20 years ago, really on this premise that the labor market doesn't work, right? And also was founded on the principle that it's not intentionally, but it actually becomes a way of sort of reinforcing biases and economic inequality. A big reason is because of resumes, right? So, over the last 40 or 50 years, as we have gone to sort of a much more transactional sort of economy where companies are just trying to move faster, they've essentially outsourced a lot of employee development to markets. And because of that, what's happened is if you look at markets today, the labor market works, pretty well for people, for a minority of Americans, right? For the 1/3 of Americans who have 4-year degrees. It works even better for those who actually have fancier degrees and have worked at name brand places. So it works really well for them, but it doesn't work at all for the 2/3 of Americans who don't have 4-year degrees, right? And so ultimately, what the founder, Michael Rosenbaum, set out to do, again, 20 years ago, was find a way of predicting whether or not people could actually have the aptitude to actually become highly successful. He picked software engineers as a category to begin with, simply because you had objective, measurable outcome data that you can model those behaviors off of, right? Much harder to do that for, let's say, a lawyer, right? You don't have it's very hard to kind of get outcome data for certain careers. But for engineering, it was a way that you could actually sort of be able to model those behaviors. And so today, it's, our business is built on this, on the idea that talent and ability is equally distributed, even if opportunity hasn't been. And what we do is, like, our technology enables us to identify people who exhibit some of these attributes. Like, we have over 500 prediction models built into our algorithm around sort of if a person is going to ultimately exhibit those behaviors. And if they do, the radical idea here is that if you give them training and if you give them opportunity, they're going to get there. And they're going to get there, by the way, faster. What we've shown is people get there twice as fast in the Catalyte model than if they're doing it on their own. Long story short, today in our business, what we optimize for when we're sourcing is, we're not looking for people who actually have those fancy degrees and pedigrees. We're actually looking, the way that we source is we go very wide. We basically put classifieds out there, ads in places like Craigslist and classified ads, asking people to take an online screening, an online assessment. And anybody can take it. And by the way, we ingest nothing about their personal information into that algorithm. So we're trying not to introduce any bias, although we all know that there's other ways that biases creep into these systems. But a key part of, again, is like, we have to look at sort of balanced outcomes, right? So at the end of the day, when we look at sort of, are we successful, is looking, there's two things that we look for. Number one is sort of diversity. Is the diversity we're getting sort of matching up to sort of the areas that we're hiring from? And largely we can show that over time, our workforce ends up looking like the cities that we intake talent from. And then secondly is that point about socioeconomic mobility. So we track that very, very closely, and we can show, the average Catalyte, person in their last job that they had was making about 24 to 25K a year, about $12 an hour. And within 5 years, the average salary they're getting paid is $98,000, right? Whether they're at Catalyte or whether they've left and gone on to other companies. And so those are the metrics that we really look at deeply. And frankly, those metrics are in many ways more important than things like, pure business metrics. And that's why we've been very guarded about our cap table, about our investors, because, look, today, if any investor came in here, they could probably see, we could probably make 10 percentage points, 1,000 basis points higher margins if we chose to sort of take away some of those outcomes. But those are key to sort of the technology. They're key to sort of why we exist. So it's a big part of, it's built in the DNA of the company.
I think
I'd like to add on to that.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'd like to add on to that a little bit and talk through also the changing nature of technology. And so, as you know, and Jake is talking, he's hitting every right note here. I love it. It's great discussion. And when you think about technology today, companies that need deeply technical skills to build deeply technical systems, that is where you need computer science capabilities. Businesses who are building business applications to enable business, computer science team members can sometimes get hung up on the wrong things. They're looking at it as an engineering problem and not a business or a people problem that we're trying to solve. And so this is, we've seen the same thing where people with strong focus and technical in school have challenges going and talking to other humans to understand the human problem. And so, we're in this phase of the world where no code, low code solutions really enable different people to step in and be producing these business solutions through technology that can be focusing on the business problem. So it's people is at the core.
I'll pile on. I mean, I love so many of the things they do at Catalyte. I think the things that are interesting is that they don't teach don't teach people how to code in Java or how to write a MySQL query. They're teaching people how to behave in an office because they didn't come from that background, right? And it's not something that you just instinctively know, right? And they'll tell you how do you deal with meetings? At my company, there's no dress code, but some places do. And if they're going to go work there, maybe they teach them that, right? So there's a lot of surrounding skills that are coming into play here. I just love that it's such a people-focused business with the outcomes that are stellar. We've got 5 people working on my team right now from Catalyte, and every one of them is a star and doing really well. They're all entry level, but I can see each and every one of them. They're motivated and they're doing really good work.
Thank you.
I really want to say, I personally feel so inspired by the work that you guys are doing. I think it's so innovative and it's so forward thinking. I have friends, I know people who, never only have a GED, but they know way more about tech than I ever would. So, being able to open up those opportunities for those people, this is just fantastic. It's not only just a great business model, I think it's great for the world and for people, what you're doing. So it's great.
Thank
we
you.
have some more questions coming in, so we're going to keep it moving. We have one from Samir Arsuzi from a company called Vari, and he asks, what do you see as the biggest challenges companies are facing in terms of bringing their employees back to work? And I'm assuming he means post-COVID. And what are some of your personal challenges that you're facing in each of your companies? This is for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
I'll tell you, I talk about it with the people that I work with, because we do talk about, the beginnings of these back to work plans, as I mentioned with Taiwan. And there's a lot of people that feel if going into the office is really just going to mean you're essentially social distancing and paranoid about everyone around you. It's not really an improvement if you're not really going to be interacting and you're sitting far away from everyone else and sort of hey, waving. So it's I would definitely call that a challenge. And until we have great testing, right, and obviously vaccines, but I think it's going to be those types of issues are going to be challenges, just bar none, for going back to work.
Mm-hmm. I would add to that. So I think one of the critical things is as we focus on humans and what humans have, and humans at home tend to have little humans. And so one of the big challenges is, what are these little humans doing during the summer and in the school year? And so as we think about businesses reopening, that's one of our fundamental questions is, how are we going to address, children? And we are very open in our office of bring your kids in before COVID. Now it's we want everybody to be healthy. And so, we're not pushing for reopening. We're really letting people kind of say for themselves, we've set out, if you do come into the office, here are the safety precautions you need to follow. But, the nature of technology work, at Mind Over Machines, you could be remote, you don't have to be in the office. And so not trying to rush back to everything's just like it used to be, I think that's super critical. Don't rush it. Really focus on what do we need to do? How do we make sure everybody's safe, both physically for COVID and mentally, that they're not, leaving a partner at home or stressing their children out or any of that stuff. So it's a tough balance.
Yeah, I'd just say, I mean, with 4 little humans at home myself, it's it's been a big challenge for me personally as we go through. You might probably hear doors banging in my background here. it's the little humans, but to all your points, I mean, it's I think the same thing here is like we one of the decisions we actually made sort of a few weeks into COVID was to kind of go fully remote, even post COVID. And I think that's one of the things that we don't want to discount coming back is that behaviors have changed, right? I mean, we've now sort of locked everybody home for 4 months. There's a lot of people who prefer to do it this way going forward. So, so even for us, we're for as a company, we're being very flexible with people. We will, we are opening up our offices soon, and we're going to allow people to come back. But, we're following all the same guidelines, but ultimately we're going to make it basically optional for most of our staff.
Fantastic. Thank you all. Jacob, there's a question for you from an anonymous participant asking what cities is Catalyte currently supporting, and is the training you provide virtual?
Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah. So today we're headquartered in Baltimore, and this is our flagship operation here. But we also now have centers in Boston, Chicago, Denver, Portland, Oregon, Chicago, and then we just launched in Scottsdale, Phoenix, in the heart of COVID. So during COVID, we actually launched there. And as I mentioned, we actually have gone fully remote. So even now, our training has also gone remote. And look, I mean, just like what I mentioned about experiments, we're watching the numbers, right? We're looking at outcomes and sort of seeing retention rates and see if that's a model that holds or not. But we're re-examining all those fundamentals of our business as we kind of come out of COVID, because again, the world will be very different. But right now, if people are interested in joining us, they can join any of our cohorts in any of our cities remotely.
Fantastic. And I'm going to go on to the next question because it's sort of related to what you were just talking about. This question is from Ed Mullen to all panelists, but he asked, how can we identify young people with tech aptitude in Baltimore and get them into a tech career pipeline? Is this a period of e-learning and opportunity?
I mean, if you don't mind me starting, I would say go look for them. So go actively seek people out. And how do you do that? Go to schools, go talk to people, go to libraries and volunteer and go find people. And I know this is a lot of effort. This is not a simple, it'd be nice if we could just post out a message, come to me, but the reality is if we want to go find good tech talent, chances are that good tech talent don't even know they're good tech talent. And that's where we need to go and tell people, hey, you're a great storyteller. There's a place for you in tech. Hey, you're a graphic designer. There's a place for you in tech. Hey, you are really focused on user experience, even though you don't even think that's what you're doing. There's a place for you in tech. There's a great place for you in tech, a needed place for you in tech. So we need to go out and find people, and we need to do that by participating in the community and proactively searching. That's where I would start with.
So Catalyte's on the supply side. I think I'm on the demand side. There's a few people that that maybe unicorns in technology that managed to, get great jobs or found great companies as without a college degree. Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, myself. But so I don't have a degree and I'm self-taught and it's not common. And so what I do is I do talk about it, and I like to go talk to people that are peers in the industry and express the idea that you don't have to go that route. And if you get the word out and people are willing to try, hiring non-traditionally, I think the results can be great. And so that's what I'm going to do. As I'm going to continue to everyone that I meet, if I go to conferences, I meet people, have lots of contacts in the industry, and just say, look, hire people that are going these alternative routes because they can do great work.
Yeah.
I love that, Nate. Now I'm your fanboy. I'll tell you what's funny is, so I moved to Baltimore from Silicon Valley, right? And the thing I've always found was ironic, right? Is if you think about the titans of the technology industry are all people who did not have those pedigrees, right? Who did not have, like, think about a person like Bill Gates or Mark Zuckerberg or Steve Jobs, Steve Wozniak, Larry Ellison. All these guys would be unhireable by the modern corporation, right? No company would have hired somebody like that. And yet they're the ones who actually built the companies that actually are disrupting those. And I think that's very instructive. Like my earlier point about sort of great developers are like great musicians. These are experiential skills, right? These are things where you can pick up and learn. You can go to Juilliard and you want to go down that path. You can also be Prince, right? And just pick up and learn 25 instruments on your own. But I think a key part of that is, I think, both Tim and Nate have sort of brought up two, I think, really important points. I think Nate's point, I think number one is like we as an economy, as sort of business leaders, need to get rid of these artificial barriers, right? These artificial hurdles to getting people into these careers, right? Such as today, if you look at, we've done studies about this, if you look at sort of the number of open jobs, like software developer jobs out in the world, 98% of them require 4-year degrees in some technical area. Right? So you've automatically disqualified most of the pioneers. Like, I mean, most companies don't have a Steve Jobs sitting in their engineering organization today, right? I mean, you've essentially, your resume sorting system has basically disqualified them from even being considered, right? So I think number one is get rid of these artificial barriers, these hurdles to getting people from non-traditional backgrounds into your organization. That's one of the ways that we, frankly, again, have automated inequality, right, by doing those things. Secondly, I think to Tim's earlier point is, if you can't see it, you can't be it, in the sense that I think a lot of kids, especially, I mean, here in Baltimore, it punches me in the face every day of our social mission when I walk out the door, right, is, people don't believe it, right? There's not enough role models here that are showing people that this is a great path. I'll tell you, it's a lot of these groups are self-selected. I mean, the best engineers are not the ones who actually went to Stanford or MIT and got 4-year degrees, 3S degrees. The best engineers are people like Nate who taught themselves how to code when they were kids. And so a lot of times we did a very interesting experiment a couple of years ago with that a nonprofit called Code in Schools. And this, again, it's self-selecting. These are kids who are interested in technology from public high schools and from public schools. And what's really interesting is when we did a little bit of a test, we screened them, they pass at higher rates than our normal, than sort of when we do it normally in the market, right? So again, a big part of it is that can we activate young people's imaginations and activate them that this is a great career. It's absolutely open and accessible by anybody, regardless of their background. And can we get more leaders in front of them to actually prove it, right? To show them that this is a great path.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Yeah. I just got excited about an idea. So I'm conscious of the fact that I don't have a degree, but it hasn't hurt my career. And I'm pretty happy with how things have gone. If you come onto a webinar, the first thing you do is you have this bio, or a conference or any place else, and people really, really emphasize what's your educational background. How about you stop doing that? What does it matter?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm all for that, Nate. That's great. And I'm so sorry. I think we've had a few more questions in the queue, but if we weren't able to get to your questions today, please feel free to reach out to myself. I can connect you to the speakers following the session. But we really want to thank everyone for joining us today. Of course, thank you to all of our speakers. You were all fantastic. I know personally, I've never heard Jacob or Nate speak before, and this was really fantastic. We'd love to have you back sometime. So right now, hold on, let me bring up, we have, for everyone who participated today, we are also hosting another webinar next Wednesday at 11 a.m. And we hope everyone can join us for that. It's going to be negotiating in a virtual world with Master Negotiator Jeff Cochran. He's from Shapiro Negotiations. And we also hope that you choose to stay connected with WTCI in the future. I think on the next slide we have our social media platforms. Please follow up on everything. We're pushing out great content all the time. And if you're interested in getting more involved with WTCI, because I know we have a lot of new faces here with us today, please feel free to contact me at lydia@wtci.org. And we hope everyone can join us next Wednesday at 11 a.m. And have a great day, everyone.